Greetings to everyone who is present here. I want to say a big thank you for the inspiring words that were heard right now from the previous speakers. And I hope when I will explain the situation in Ukraine, we could see many parallels of the hypocritical and the double standard policies of the Western governments that are happening in both countries. I left Ukraine, and I was lucky to do so less than a year before Russian invasion, after I was lucky to be forced to flee because of the political persecution by my own state. It started after I tore down the flag of the organization called Ukrainian Insurgent Army. They are Nazi collaborators responsible for the death of more than 100 Polish and Jewish civilians during the Second World War, and whose flag today flies in the central square of my hometown. And after that, a criminal case was opened, threatening up to 4 years in prison. And when the far-right radicals began appearing outside of my relatives' home, looking for me, for the sake of my own and for the sake of my loved ones, I fled, using my master thesis as the way out. Orphaned at the age of 9 and raised by my early grandmother, today I am separated from my family, as many of the other Ukrainian families are. Non-willing to participate in the war, today I cannot return to my own country, and I can only wonder whether I will ever see my grandmother or my family members ever again. And yet, I still consider myself incredibly lucky. I could have, like many Ukrainian friends, spent months trapped in my own apartment, terrified of being forced to risk my life at the same time by taking the life of others. Or like another close friend of mine, I could have endured 2 desperate weeks on foot trying to cross the Ukrainian border through the remote Carpathian mountains, hiding from the drones, trying not to freeze, hiding from the dogs and from the soldiers of my own country, ordered to shoot to kill their own compatriots trying to flee the country. Or I could have been one of the more than 40 bodies pulled out of the single river on the Romanian border, the Tisa, which for many Ukrainians has become a deadly line separating them from the rights that should be granted to them. According to the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, about 3/4 of all soldiers fighting on the front lines have been mobilized, not volunteered. And as the UN Commissioner for Human Rights reported the very same month, November 2024, as the report came out, torture, beatings, suffocations, and strangulations were used by draft officers as the part of the mobilization process. The methods of these mobilizations regularly produce surreal incidents. Almost every day, Ukrainian society, is shaken by the photos of mothers showing the battered bodies of their sons, previously abducted by the draft officers and later falsely declared dead from heart failure or a stroke. And their pleas of their parents for the justice obviously remain unanswered. And last year, when I asked a member of the Bundestag, German parliament, the member of the governing coalition and member of the Bundestag about this exact report documenting these tortures, she looked me straight in the eye in front of several witnesses and said, "We know and discuss everything that is happening in Ukraine, but we will never bring it out to the public." Very similar to Israel, while condemning Russia for its contempt of human rights, the governments accept and legitimize the systematic practice of torture in Ukraine. They speak of the need to continue the wars to defend freedom. But what does freedom have to do with the decision to forbid people from leaving the war zone and forcing them instead into the bloodbath? They speak of protecting our future, but what could be more dangerous for the future than normalizing the dehumanization of entire peoples and toying with, even mocking, the risk of nuclear war? They speak of defending democracy, but what could be a greater betrayal of democracy than abolishing the one defense ordinary people have against the arbitrariness of the state? free democratic elections. And what could be a greater threat to democracy than disregarding such fundamental rights as the rights for security and the right to refuse to kill? But these politicians, they are right in one thing. The democracies are really in danger worldwide. But we must say clearly, the threat to our democracies does not come from a specific nationality, culture, or religion. The real danger lies in extreme social inequality, in profit-driven warmongering, and in the selective application of basic human rights. And the only way to resist this danger is to reject division, to stop branding entire nations as enemies, and to demand a return to realistic dialogue, to readiness for compromises, and to the counterparts' security concerns, to the solutions that can help us to stop the advance of the far-right forces in Russia, in Ukraine, but as well as in Israel, in the United States, and here in Europe. Democracy is really worldwide in danger, and only a global rejection of confrontational politics can deprive the radicals of the support, protect democracies, and make the world a place where justice is more than a promise. And that is why I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the organizers of the event and to everybody who came here, because the coming together of organizations and actors that take principled stance on human rights and on the interests of the broader society clearly sets us apart from the national egoists and offers a way out of today's security crisis. My organization, our organization, the Alliance of the Post-Soviet Left, in turn brings together conscious objectors, deserters, and political exiles from Russia and Ukraine who remain in close contact with underground and persecuted anti-war groups on both sides of the conflict. We collect and systemize evidence of the violations and repressions tearing our countries apart, and we are always ready and glad and thankful to support those who share our struggle. And talking about Ukraine, according to the Ukraine's Prosecutor General, talking about the people who have fled the army and decided not to partake in the war, in just first 6 months of this year, Ukraine had seen 125,000 of new deserters and conscientious objectors. And I must emphasize very much, to stand with Ukraine means to stand with them, with its people, and not with those who ensure the safety of their own families while forcing the others to sacrifice their life and the lives of their children. Freedom indeed cannot be made out through coercion. And the very first step that the European governments could have taken would be to tie those billions poured into weapons to concrete measures taken by the Ukrainian authorities, measures aimed at reducing the scale of the lawlessness and the torture of their own citizens. But that, of course, is not what we see, not what we are meant to see, because these armed deliveries and this war itself have nothing to do with freedom. They have nothing to do with democracy, and they have nothing to do with the interests of the Ukrainian people or the Ukrainian state. They serve one thing only, the interests of the neoconservative transatlantic clique, my dear friends. And finally, when they claim that supporting this war, or any war by that matter, is about defending Europeans and their rights, I want to make this absolutely clear. Not one European could be truly confident in their rights until human rights and democratic rights apply to all. And no one can ever feel truly safe until the security is guaranteed for all. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And please welcome a dear friend of mine, a political exile from Russia, Liza Smirnova. Thank you.
Bonjour, camarades.
Hello, everyone. Have you seen how Donald Trump has changed in the last weeks? He promised to sign an agreement in order to establish peace. And now he's calling Russia a paper tiger and is sending nuclear submarines near its coastlines. His war minister is telling the generals, we are getting ready to war and we are preparing to a victory. So the strategy of the agreement has failed. This means a cynical peace, an imperialistic peace between the great powers to the detriment of our peoples hasn't worked. Contradictions are too great, and here we are faced alone to this endless war. And people in Russia see this as well. For them, the war has already lasted for 43 months. 250 to 300,000 people have died, and hundreds of thousands have become disabled. The polls show that at least 3/3 of the Russian population want immediate negotiations and the end of the bloodshed. At the front, fatigue is even deeper. Soldiers are exhausted, as show their diaries, their letters, and their conversations that are heard. The number of deserters is growing, but why this fatigue isn't changing into a protest against the war? There are several answers to this question. The first is that the Russian authorities have perfected their neoliberal techniques. Now the poor are signing contracts with the army that cannot be terminated, and that is changing them practically into slaves for money. For the death of one soldier, the family receives more than a salary, an entire life salary of a worker. Poverty and inequalities have not just changed human life into a commodity, but it has changed life itself. The central element of the system is this repressive apparatus. Any dissidence leads to jail. Any attempt to oppose to the injustice on the front is punished by torture and often by death. But there is another reason. Only one political solution in order to put an end to this war. Many people have been lost. For example, I have a friend, a left-side activist. In 2022, he opposed to the war and took part in several demonstrations. In these demonstrations, which were repressed, he got discouraged and lost all hope. Neither the left parties, the liberal pacifist parties have been able to tell him how to put an end to the war. Most of them, on the opposite, were calling for an escalation, and he, as millions of Russians, decided that the most realistic path towards peace was a victory of Russia through weapons. He signed a contract and left for the front. 6 months later, he was killed. Of course, money is the foundation of the Putin's military machine. But without hope for peace, that is, of life, even money doesn't work. Finally, all hopes are turned towards Trump and his deal with Putin. Whatever it may, if we can just end this nightmare. Today, this hope has vanished. The main lesson in these 40 months of horror is that the actual regime is incompatible with peace. When my friends and I, thank you. When my friends and I took part in the demonstrations against war at the beginning of the conflict, we were numerous, especially in Moscow. But it was about mainly the educated middle class. and none of those who pay the high price of this war today. Most of the people looked at us with distrust. For them, we were the privileged elite. People feared that the politicians who were in favor of the Western world would get along with the Western world against the ordinary Russians, as in the 1990s. When the protest was repressed, almost 1 million of war opponents left the country. Moscow, the city which was the most opposed to the regime, has become the most faithful one and loyal. Today, the discontent is accumulated in the poor regions among the working class. But neither the liberal opposition, neither the Western politicians discuss with these people. On both sides, they want a war until the victory, that of Ukraine and the Western world. More shells and more missiles still. It's as if Putin proposed a victory and the Western world the defeat, as if there was no other option. I know that many of you called Putin's useful idiots when you oppose to the militarization of your countries. After all, the leading class in the Western part of the world behave as just like the Russian oligarchy. They're calling to tighten our belt, to defeat the exterior enemy. Yes, to defeat the external enemy. And those who disagree are called foreign agents. Just as in Russia, for Starmer, Macron, or Trump, the war is becoming a means to preserve power, often to the detriment of democracy. But Putin does not fear a military defeat. Even worse, he has at his disposal the atomic bomb. Each escalation only strengthens his power. This is why what we are doing today is even much more dangerous for his dictature than the bombs and missiles that Macron, Scholz, Merz, or Trump are sending to the front. We want to offer to our people what their leaders refusing, peace. It's the main question, not the victory, but precisely peace. The end of the bloodshed, the carnage. And this is what most of the Russians think, especially in the trenches. This world must not be directed by abstract conditions, neither by borders drawn by politicians and civil servants, neither by national or imperial fantasies. This must be a world founded on will, that of people themselves, on their self-determination. Self-determination does not simply consist in referendums to determine to what state a territory belongs to. Self-determination is the return to a collective destiny at the hands of the people themselves. But will Vladimir Putin accept such a peace? I doubt it. It will certainly seduce thousands and thousands of people in the trenches and millions at the back. And if Putin refuses it to them, he will have to wage war on two fronts. The program we are discussing about today brings together the fall of Putin's regime more than all the missiles from NATO. But it is impossible to offer an anti-war platform that is democratic, loud and clear from the inside of Russia. The liberal opposition and Russian pro-Western world is incapable of it, and even less the Western elites. Only the left-wing forces and anti-imperialist forces can do it. This is the reason why I suggest creating a working group that will be in charge of establishing the platform. Until our next meeting, we can and we must turn our words into actions. For example, for us Russians, there is a specific date, January 19th, day of the anti-fascists that were killed, the commemoration against political repressions and victims. Today, the main victims of repressions are deserters. I'd like to say with pride that one of the Russian deserters has joined our Russian-Ukrainian coalition. And he is here with us today, Ilya Zaripov. The 19th of January, we could make of this day a day of solidarity with the deserters and war opponents, victims of repressions. Solidarity with them would be a concrete contribution to the beginning of a change in Russia. Only these changes will be bearers of a true peace. Thank you very much.